How do you fight injustice? This past Sunday, I preached from Acts chapter 16. I talked about being led by the Holy Spirit. And we talked about Paul and Silas when God miraculously caused an earthquake to happen while they were in prison. And the chains fell off of them, and they didn't get up and leave the prison like you would have expected for them to do. And because of what they did, the Philippian jailer gave his heart to Christ, him and his whole family, and were baptized. But one of the parts of this story that we don't talk about a whole lot is actually how Paul and Silas fought against injustice. And the question I want to ask you this week is, how do Christians fight against injustice? When we talk about things that are going on currently in our culture, like immigration, or the war that's going on over abortion, or over things that are injustices that are being done to people that are marginalized or in poverty. Sometimes Christians get the reputation as being people who don't stand up and fight against injustice, who just allow things to happen because we're just supposed to forgive and let it go. But Paul and Silas in this chapter actually show how to fight against injustice in a Christ-like way. I want to read one verse from Acts chapter 16. It's verse 37. I want to point out a couple things from this because I think it's really helpful for us as Christians to know how to fight against injustice in a way that honors Christ. Verse 37 says, "But Paul said to the officers, 'They beat us publicly without a trial, even though we are Roman citizens, and threw us into prison. And now, do they want to get rid of us quietly? No, let them come themselves and escort us out.'" Now, Paul and Silas had been beaten without a trial because the Romans, the magistrates of the day, thought that they were Jewish people and didn't realize that they had Roman citizenship. But what the magistrates didn't know was that Paul and Silas were actually Roman citizens. And so after Paul had this incredible experience with the Philippian jailer and led him to Christ, and the guy was about to release him, he said, "No, we were beaten without a trial. You can send the magistrates down to talk to us themselves." And so what Paul was doing was making them publicly face the wrong that they had committed. And they were used to being able to beat Jewish people, but there was a law set in place that they couldn't do that to a Roman citizen. So Paul, in essence, was showing them the wrong actions on their parts, and he was using the law to do it. But the way Paul fights injustice is what I really want to highlight. As Christians, we are supposed to fight injustice. We are supposed to fight for truth and for what's right and for righteousness. But Paul here and Silas loved this Philippian jailer. And I want you to notice from the text, and you can read all of Acts chapter 16, but this jailer was actually a part of a corrupt system. And Paul realized that his enemy was not this person. And Paul's enemy wasn't even these magistrates who he said, make them come down and release us themselves. His enemy was evil itself. And so even though he was fighting against corruption and fighting against the powers of evil, he loved the people that were caught up in that very system. And I want to point that out to you this week, that as you stand up for what's right, as you fight against injustice, and as you face things in our current culture that just make you angry, realize that even the people caught up within those things need Christ. And Paul and Silas were able to lead this Philippian jailer to Christ, but at the same time called out a system that he was a part of to accountability. And that's the way that we're able to fight injustice.